period of time, maintaining flexibility by not entering into any legally binding commitments beyond 2 units of nuclear power stations upfront, and making stop-go decisions based on an assessment of the progress in implementation. The economic environment, taking into account the progress of implementation, the economic environment, fiscal position, and affordability.
What are stop-go decisions?
I beg your pardon?
What are stop-go decisions?
Well, making sure that we evaluate as we move on with the implementation and proceed.
The project can stop at any time?
Yes, which means you actually structure it such that you are able, if it's in phases, that you are able to stop at a particular time when it proves to be unsustainable beyond that point.
Right. What did you learn about discussions between the officials of the 2 departments, namely Treasury and Energy?
Well, I was advised that this approach was discussed between the officials of the Treasury and the Department of Energy, and that whilst the latter were originally determined to motivate for the purchase of 9.6 gigawatts, they were ultimately persuaded to accept the phased procurement.
Did you receive further advice?
Indeed, also advised that even when there were changes at the level of DG at the Energy, the Treasury DG and his colleagues took time to explain to each succeeding DG the rationale behind phased procurement.
Did the Treasury team make a recommendation for a feasibility study?
The Treasury team recommended the provision of 200 million rands for a feasibility study for preparatory work that would allow for a more thorough consideration of the costs, risks, and benefits.
What happened on the 8th of December 2015?
On this day, the 8th of December 2015, former President Mr. Zuma met with all the cabinet members whose portfolios were relevant to the nuclear deal. We met at the Presidential Guest House, Mahlambandlovu, now known as Sefako Makgato, in Pretoria. The meeting was initially scheduled for 3 o'clock, 1500 hours, but I was later advised that the meeting would take place an hour later. When I arrived at the venue just before 1600 hours, I discovered that some consultation had taken place between Mr. Zuma and my cabinet colleagues, including State Security Minister David Mahlobo, International Relations Minister Maite Mashabane, Public Enterprises Minister Lynn Brown, and Energy Minister Tina Johnson-Peterson, to my exclusion and my team from the Treasury.
You've explained the role of Treasury in the consideration of the nuclear project and its implementation. Was any explanation given to you for your exclusion from this initial consultation?
I did not inquire because as I walked in, that's when we were moving into the formal meeting.
Right. Do you have any explanation in your own mind?
I just found it strange that it happened, and I thought our exclusion just continued to demonstrate that we were not viewed as a willing partner in the process.
Was this a pattern?
Pardon?
Was this a continuing pattern, the exclusion of Treasury?
Indeed.
Was it the exclusion of Treasury that was a pattern, or was it an attitude towards Treasury that was a pattern?
I think it was both, because as you would recall that at times it would be just, and as you would see also even in the subsequent meeting, the Treasury officials having been left out with the minister having to have to ask for them to be included. But so in addition to the attitude, the exclusion also seemed, and even when we were tabling, I'm sure we will come to that in a while also, where it came to the tabling or presentation that the Department of Energy made, having worked together with Treasury, but the presentation excluding what had come from the Treasury team in order to enrich the process.
And in any event, maybe the exclusion was a manifestation of the attitude.
Correct.
Minister Nene, I'm asked by a member of the legal team to ask you whether or not the amount of 200 million rand for a feasibility study is not excessive. Is that not a lot of money for a feasibility study?
Well, I think it's a figure that the officials arrived at after careful consideration. I wouldn't say it was excessive, but considering the magnitude and the size of the project, perhaps. But that doesn't mean that the amount having been allocated, it means that all of it has to be spent.
Yes.
But that was a signaling from the Treasury side that we want to assist the process, because the process is going to give us an outcome that says proceed or not proceed.
Thank you for that. Did you attend the meeting then at 4 o'clock in the afternoon?
Indeed, I attended that meeting,
Were you accompanied by Treasury officials?
accompanied by the Director General, Lungisa Fuzile, DDG Michael Sachs, and DDG Dondo Mkhajane.
At that meeting, was anything mentioned about the prior consultation of
Nothing
which
wa-
you have told the Chair?
Nothing was mentioned about the prior consultation. We just proceeded together in the boardroom for the Nuclear Committee meeting, which I had originally been requested to attend, and nothing about the prior consultation. Initially, I entered the meeting without my officials, as it was a ministerial meeting. But when I noticed that the Minister of Energy had included officials from the Department of Energy, I requested, as I earlier indicated to the question by the Deputy Chief Justice, I requested the Treasury officials to participate in the meeting.
And did they?
Indeed, they were allowed, they were asked to come in.
What happened at the meeting?
Well, the officials who were present from the Department of Energy presented the proposed nuclear program to the President and the ministers in the room. Presentation did not reflect the input from Treasury regarding the concerns with the feasibility of the program and the possible scaled approach. Instead, the energy officials presented a procurement plan based on the production of the entire 9.6 gigawatt of nuclear energy. The department's assumptions were extremely optimistic with respect to the assumed construction cost and exchange rate implications, resulting in a much lower cost for the program than was realistic. In addition, there was no consideration for the fiscal implications under different economic scenarios.
Can you give some examples?
Well, the presentation, for instance, assumed an exchange rate of 10 rands to the dollar, whereas the exchange rate assumed by the National Treasury was between 12 and 14 rands to the dollar. In fact, on that day, the exchange rate was 14 rand 57 to the dollar. So, yeah, put simply, failing to show the committee a scenario depicting the rate at which the rand was exchanged for the dollar on that day meant that the committee was presented with a 40% understatement of the cost of nuclear. So if the price, for instance, of 9.6 gigawatts was $100 billion US, the understatement was going to be $40 billion US. This was truly, that was about 560 billion rands. This was a truly gross material understatement of the project. While it could have been possible to argue that the rand could regain its strength, it is instructive that the rand is trading at around 14 rands as we speak this week.
After the presentation, did you have an exchange with the former president?
The former president asked me if I had anything to say in response.
This was in the meeting still?
In the meeting, yes. I pointed out that the concerns of Treasury were not included in the presentation. In particular, I noted that the assumptions in relation to the exchange rate were optimistic and that there was still no funding model accompanying the presentation. I didn't really think that there was any point in saying more and resisting any further. I suggested that the officials from the Department of Energy and Treasury finalize the presentation for the cabinet meeting the next day. And I further then requested my Director General at the time, Mr. Lungisa Fuzile, to give his input. He expressed serious concerns at length regarding the cost implications of the proposal and the failure by the Department of Energy to phase the construction over the longer period of time.
Far be it from me, Minister Nene, to accuse you of understatement again. when you say you didn't really think that there was any point in saying more and resisting any further, what were your actual considerations at that time?
Look, I thought I'd reached a point where I had done everything humanly possible to, express our views on the matter. But seeing that it continues to be either undermined, excluded, and not being part, I thought there was just no point in continuing to raise the issues.
How did the meeting conclude?
I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius. I just want to understand more what your attitude was at that stage. Do you mean that you may have reached a point where, as far as you were concerned, the relevant people were not going to listen to reason?
There was enough evidence of that, because it was clear that, for instance, after so much work that had gone into it with our officials, to come to a meeting and allow the officials of one department to present their views to the complete exclusion of the views of the National Treasury team. And also, that's why I actually just stated the obvious with regards to the exchange rate assumptions and also the absence of the funding model. But beyond that, I thought I had expended all my fighting power.
Thank you.
How did the meeting conclude, Minister?
It concluded with a decision to proceed with the nuclear program, a proposal by the Department of Energy, despite the contrary views of the Treasury. In fact, the President made an off-the-cuff remark that Treasury would not do to us what you did with Petro SA.
To whom was he speaking when he said what you did with Petro SA?
Well, I think with the Petro SA deal also, we were perhaps, it's a deal that I referred to earlier. I think the National Treasury was seen also as having not been cooperative, and as a result, the deal could not proceed.
So he was referring to Treasury?
Correct.
So, as at that point when you felt like the relevant people would not listen to reason, and were not prepared to listen to reason, would I be right to think that you basically had put up all the arguments that you thought should persuade everybody that Treasury should be given a chance to do what they needed to do before final decisions were taken?
That is correct, Chief Justice.
What happened after the meeting that night? That's the meeting with the President.
Well, that night after the meeting with the President was concluded, my officials and I proceeded to Sheraton Hotel for coffee. We were all astounded at what had transpired at the meeting, given the magnitude of the nuclear build program. The proposed nuclear build program would eclipse even the strategic defense procurement package, which is commonly known as the arms deal, in terms of its financial implications. So if we reflect on that one, we thought that it was initiated before even the Public Finance Management Act came into effect. Yet, even without its prescripts, the National Treasury played a central role in developing affordability reports, advising the Cabinet on economic, fiscal, and financial impact and risks of the procurement, and monitoring and evaluating the budgetary implications of the envisaged procurement package. The officials from National Treasury in that process served and played a meaningful role in several committees that were to advise Cabinet on the feasibility of the arms procurement, including the Finance Negotiating Working Group, which assisted in negotiating foreign exchange loan agreements with foreign banks and in negotiating financial aspects of the procurement with the suppliers and supplier-related parties. And the Financing Evaluation Team, which amongst others was to conduct a fiscal analysis of the affordability and budget impact of the proposals. Several key reports were produced with the assistance of the finance officials, including the availability of funding report, which was adopted by the Minister of Finance on the 30th of June, 1998. The reports were presented to Cabinet, and once the acquisition process began, the Cabinet appointed a ministerial committee, which included the Minister of Finance, to lead the process with a view to achieving affordable agreements with the suppliers.
I'll ask you to pause there, Minister Nene. Prior to the Cabinet decision of 9 December 2015, which you're going to talk about in a moment, I understand, had any availability of funding report of whatever nature been presented to Cabinet?
It had not been, even though, as I indicated earlier, that the National Treasury had developed this preliminary report that had to serve before the committee, but was not taken into account moving forward. It was
and that
totally
was the
excluded.
phased approach, as I understand.
Correct.
But in the absence of a phased approach, and if that proposal was rejected and the whole project was implemented with immediate effect, do you know what Treasury would have said about the availability of funding?
Look, it was definitely going to be unaffordable. And as I would say, that the numbers that were up as different scenarios would have meant almost the entire budget of that particular financial year being committed, or an increase in the borrowing requirement of government that would have taken us to completely unsustainable levels. And yet government has got so many other imperatives to address, including dealing with the needs of the poor in our country.
In paragraph 97 of your statement, you summarized the historical functions of Treasury in procurement processes of this nature and size. Do you want to comment?
Well, National Treasury in that instance played an integral role on the financial aspects of the arms procurement process, including warning of the financial and fiscal risks and defining the most appropriate way of financing the procurement of the defense packages. The details of the role of the National Treasury was fully set out before the Commission, the Seriti Commission, and it is not necessary for me to go into that or expand on that here. I simply wish to point out that in relation to the arms deal, a rigorous procurement process was conducted with the support of Cabinet. Since then, our laws have even been revised to require even more rigor in both the procurement process and in the management of public finances. Yet, despite the nuclear procurement process being multiple times the cost of the arms deal, this rigor was not observed.
Right. Whilst you were at the Sheraton Hotel, did you see a report in the media?
Well, the report that we saw in the media was a report that was saying that I would be fired and Mr. Des van Rooyen would replace me. Again, I did not pay much regard to that, to the reports. We annexed the printed newspaper report the following morning as NN5.
That's at page 420.
Correct.
It's in very small print.
Yes.
But to be brief, it says more or less what you say it says.
Yes.
Were you surprised at this report?
Not really, but I had again reached a point of indifference when you see some of these things, and you know where you almost know where you're heading.
You shrugged your shoulders.
True.
What happened the next morning? Did you meet with the President?
Well, the next morning we had to brief the President, inform him of the documents that would be tabled at the Cabinet meeting.
Sorry, that is the 9th of December 2015.
The 9th of December, before Cabinet sits, yes. That's when we met with the President the following morning, and I informed him of the documents that would be tabled at the Cabinet meeting. Of particular importance was to apprise the President of the budget allocations for the following year. As this was the last Cabinet meeting of the year, Cabinet needed to adopt the budget recommendations so that preparations could be undertaken over the vacation period. The President did not raise with me the intention to remove me from office.
All right. The Cabinet meeting then began, as you say, at 8:30 a.m.
Yes.
We have been able to declassify the cabinet minutes, so we can talk a little then about the occurrences, what occurred at that cabinet meeting. Can I take you please to the bundle? Sorry. Cabinet minutes.
Is it on this one? On the last one? Page 4?
Sorry. Page 445, that will be in bundle KB or KA2.
K1B, or not
K1B.
K1B,
Yeah.
I'm reminded. Thank you, Chair.
page 400.
And 45.
445.
Okay.
These documents, Chair, have been declassified. It's not necessary to go into much detail unless you wish to, Minister, but what is noteworthy about the proposal in paragraph 7 of the minute of the Cabinet meeting of 9 December 2015 is that the proposal comes from the Minister of Energy. There's no proposal or co-proposal that involves the Treasury or
That
your
is-
ministry.
That is correct. Yeah.
And it
Mr.
seems
Pretorius,
that- yes.
what you are asking us to look at page 345.
445.
445.
445.
445.
Oh,
My
okay.
apologies, Chair.
Okay. Oh, okay, thank you.
Do you have it, Chair?
I've got it.
In short, it appears that, subject to some alteration, the Cabinet approved the proposal from the Department of Energy.
That is correct.
There's nothing apparent here about any phased approach,
No.
and there's no mention here of any compliance with the provisions of the Public Finance Management Act or the presentation or consideration of any feasibility study. Am I correct?
You are correct.
Thank you.
The only interesting point made at the end, which is on paragraph D of the what Cabinet approved, it requested that where relevant, the exchange rates referred to in the memorandum be adjusted to current values. And as I said, that would have been a huge adjustment from 10 rand to the dollar to about 14 rand at current rate, and we're talking 40% again. And
Did you participate in the discussion at that stage in Cabinet?
indeed, my participation again was limited to raising the same issues I had raised in the meeting prior, including that of the exchange rate and the non-inclusion of the funding model.
Is anything you said at that Cabinet meeting inconsistent with what you have told the Chair today about your attitude towards the nuclear deal?
No.
You have just referred to D at page 445. The note that it was requested that where relevant, the exchange rates referred to in the memorandum be adjusted to current values. And you have just indicated what a big jump that would have been in terms of what the cost would be. Are you able to say whether the Cabinet appreciated what that big jump, how big it was, or maybe they might not have appreciated?
Looking at the way the resolution is crafted, I don't think it mattered, because all the others are approved. The D is requested.
But in terms of the jump in costs that that adjustment would reveal, one would have expected that you would want to see that adjustment first, maybe before you approve, or not really, or you say it might not have mattered.
It seems like it didn't, because if I mean, in an ideal situation, that's what we should have, as cabinet, done. But that was not done. It was put there as the last matter. But I must say that after that, when we tabled our budget, when we did our budget presentation, which came after this, again, with that having not been declassified because we did not request, but we did factor in what the implications of this might be, as is our responsibility.
Okay, no, thank you.
Minister, we know, and you will tell us in due course, after dealing with a few other matters which are relevant, what the outcome of that meeting was, or at least what occurred afterwards in relation to yourself. But it's perhaps appropriate now to summarize the situation immediately prior to your dismissal as minister. It seems from the minute that we have in the bundle that the proposal was largely in the hands of the Department of Energy, am I correct?
That's correct.
And that to an extent at least, and consistent with the pattern as you've told the Chair, Treasury and the concerns of Treasury had at the very least been put to one side, if not ignored. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You've also told us what happened at the BRICS Summit, which similarly seemed to show that to the exclusion of Treasury and without consultation with Treasury, it was suggested, proposed to you that you should enter into some sort of arrangement or binding agreement involving Russian suppliers for the nuclear deal. You recall that evidence?
Yes.
And again, it seems that Treasury and Treasury's concerns were put to one side, if not ignored.
That's correct.
You've also referred to attacks on yourself and attacks on the integrity and viability of Treasury, which it is apparent from the evidence, at least that we have to date, were largely unexplained and have been largely uninvestigated. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Against these, or in these circumstances, and given your own consideration of these circumstances, can I ask you to just confirm what you have confirmed in your statement earlier in regard to the evidence of Mr. Jonas? One of the paragraphs Mr. Jonas gave evidence in relation to is paragraph 41, and that's one of the paragraphs that you confirmed having read and agreed with. Can I just read it onto the record, please, for your further comment? There was pressure on us from former President Zuma and other members of the cabinet to approve the nuclear deal. I think I'm going to read it as it is. Brackets, close brackets, that pressure was immense and was ultimately the trigger for Mr. Nene's dismissal on 9 December 2015, after he again refused to back the deal at a cabinet meeting that day. Do you still agree with that statement?
I do, Chair.
Who were the other members of cabinet who were also putting pressure on Treasury to agree to this deal?
I mentioned earlier the Minister of International Relations and the Minister of State Security as those that were very vocal.
And the Minister of State Security at that time was Mr. Mahlobo, is that right?
That is correct.
And the Minister of International Relations was Ms.
Maite Nkwane Mashaba.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Correct.
Thank you, Chair. You go on to deal in your statement with South African Airways Can I ask you to deal with that issue insofar as you deem necessary, and perhaps given the pressure of time, you can take the liberty and summarize where necessary.
I'll try and do and summarize. On the 11th of December 2014, SAA was brought under administration of Treasury. This was gazetted on the 19th of December. This was done due to poor governance and financial instability in the airline. At the time of the transfer, SAA's financial position was extremely weak. In the 2012-13 financial year, the airline suffered a loss of 1.2 billion rands. The loss increased to 2.6 billion in 2013-14, and the airline was on track to realize an even larger loss for the 2014-15 financial year, which eventually amounted to 5.6 billion rands. Company was technically insolvent, with its liabilities exceeding its assets by 3.5 billion rands as at March 2014, and was experiencing severe liquidity challenges. It was only able to raise funding with the support of government guarantees. A total of 7.9 billion in guarantees had already been issued to the airline to enable it to continue operating as a going concern.
I'm sorry, Minister, before you proceed.
Yes.
From that paragraph, namely paragraph 102, one sees a picture of SAA in terms of which 3 years in a row, it seems, its financial loss was like doubling.
Yes.
And these were billions of rand. 2012-2013 financial year, the loss had gone up to 2.6 billion, and 1.2 billion rand in the financial year of 2012-2013. In the next financial year, the loss increased to 2.6 billion. And in the next financial year, that is now 2014-2015, it went up to 5.6 billion rand. Was there nothing being done in between after this financial year when it was seen that the loss was so much? Was there nothing being done to make sure that the following year was better? Or was there an environment that prevented proper steps being taken to cap the losses?
I think it was very clear that whatever it is that was being done was not working. And hence we were of the view that the decision that was taken then to place it under administration of the Treasury was trying to arrest the situation, albeit very, very late when so much damage had actually occurred.
I'm sure that the figures one sees here are probably not different from the figures that one has seen about SAA in the public domain.
That's correct.
But each time you look at them, they are just shocking.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So it was then incumbent upon me as Minister of Finance to ensure that the decisions then that are taken by SAA were responsible and consistent with the turnaround strategy to stabilize the entity that had been tabled before Cabinet.
Before you go on, may I ask you, Minister, to go back to paragraph 101? I'm not sure that we dealt in appropriate detail with the outcome of the Cabinet meeting on the 9th of December 2015. It's contained in the last sentence of paragraph 101.
Yes, that the Department of Energy was also instructed to issue a request for proposals for the nuclear build program with the final funding model to be informed by the responses received to the request for proposal.
Right. You were at paragraph 104 before I interrupted you, Minister.
Well, among other things then were issues of the going concern guarantees. Prior to the transfer of the executive authority responsibilities, the former Minister of Public Enterprises had written to the Minister of Finance on the 21st of November 2014, requesting the concurrence of the Minister of Finance to the issuance of a 6.488 billion rands perpetual going concern guarantee in favor of SAA.
What is a perpetual going concern guarantee, Minister?
This is the guarantee that seeks to, because of the challenge of the going concern, it's a guarantee that would actually enable the SAA to be even to finalize their statements on a going concern basis and to secure the liquidity that is necessary to meet its commitments. Now,
who was the reference to the former Minister of Public Enterprises there is a reference to?
I think it was Minister Lynn Brown.
Thank you.
Now, at the time, SAA's cash flow forecast showed that it would run out of cash by mid-January the following year unless additional guarantees were provided. This would have triggered a default by SAA on its guaranteed debt, requiring government to meet the obligations on SAA's behalf, as well as negative economic impact and loss of jobs. Now, having reviewed this application, which was submitted in November, we reviewed it on the 22nd of December. In my view, in my new capacity now as executive authority of the airline, I issued the guarantee in favor of the airline, bringing the total guarantee facility to 14.4 billion rands. In reaching this decision, I took into account the recommendations of the Fiscal Liability Committee, comprising of the Directors General and other officials in the relevant divisions in National Treasury. In August 2015...
Before you go on, may I just
yes.
point out through you, at this stage, South African Airways resided within the Ministry of Finance, am I correct?
That is correct.
Rather than the Department of Public Enterprises.
Correct.
Yes, you were at paragraph 107.
Yes. Then in August 2015, SAA submitted an application for additional guarantees totaling 5 billion rands. Like the previous year, this was required in order for the airline to be able to finalize its financial statements on a going concern basis and secure liquidity again. The same committee, the Fiscal Liability Committee, recommended that I do not approve the issuance of the requested guarantee, citing concerns that there was no financial case to support the issuance of the guarantee, and that the governance challenges at SAA did not provide confidence that the airline would turn around within the projected time frames. Now, as I said earlier, that the Fiscal Liability Committee is a structure comprising of senior officials in the Treasury, mainly the DDGs of various divisions, which is chaired by the DDG who heads Asset and Liability Management. It evaluates all applications for guarantees and makes recommendations to the Minister of Finance. In evaluating the applications, the committee seeks to determine the probability that a state guarantee might be called, namely that the National Revenue Fund might have to make good some or all of the amount guaranteed. In terms of the PFMA, calls against a guarantee are a direct charge against the National Revenue Fund. So if a state-owned company whose debt is guaranteed by the sovereign fails to pay its debt when it falls due, then the creditors have recourse against the National Revenue Fund, and such a payment supersedes even the payments for Social Security grants. That's the risk that we were at now. While the approval of a guarantee does not lead to an immediate outflow of cash from the Revenue Fund, if the guarantee is extended to an entity whose balance sheet and cash flows are weak, it can be a huge inconvenience to the country, and the way guarantees work cuts out parliamentary scrutiny. It is for this reason that Treasury's approach to guarantees has always been very circumspect.
Minister, when you say that guarantees cut out parliamentary scrutiny, would you just explain that to the Commission?
I mean, because it can be processed without having to go through a parliamentary process.
Thank you.
With above context and bearing in mind the advice I was given on the nuclear guarantee, I wrote to the chairperson requiring that the SAA finalize certain outstanding matters before the 18th of September 2015. because concluding these matters would assist in improving the financial performance of the South African Airways. Amongst the outstanding matters to be finalized before the guarantee request would be considered was the conclusion of the Airbus contract, which I'm about to talk to directly after this. As no response was received from the airline, I wrote again to SAA on the 28th of September, requiring that the outstanding matters be finalized by the following day. This would have allowed me to table the airline's annual financial statement by the 30th of December as prescribed in the legislation.
Minister Nene, you refer in paragraph 112 to the chairperson. I presume you mean the chairperson at SAA.
The chairperson of SAA, yes.
Who was that?
The chairperson of SAA was Ms. Dudumieni. In a response dated the 29th of September, the chairperson provided a high-level overview and update on the outstanding matters that I had raised. On the 30th of September, I responded that I had referred SAA's response to the Fiscal Liability Committee for due consideration. At the same time, I stressed the decision on the A320 and the A330 swap transaction, what it would have a material impact on the amount of support required, and that delays in reaching finality on this matter could delay a decision on the going concern request. That's the contract, the Airbus contract has said I would want to spend a bit of time on. This contract related to a purchase agreement that had been concluded between SAA and Airbus in 2002. Among other things in the agreement, SAA was to purchase 15 A320-200 aircrafts, which we just refer to them as the A320s. This agreement was amended in 2008 to increase the number of the A320s to 20. Of these, 10 were delivered between 2013 and 2015. The remaining 10 were due to be delivered between 2015 and 2017. Now, as a result of SAA's financial pressures and the pre-delivery payments falling due, the SAA management renegotiated the terms of the amended purchase agreement with Airbus, in which the parties agreed that the purchase of the remaining 10 A320s would be cancelled, and SAA would enter into operating leases of 5 long-haul, the A330s now, carriers from Airbus.
And according to your statement, there were decided advantages to this arrangement.
Absolutely.
What were they?
The SAA would not be required to recognize impairments that they would otherwise have to.
Impairments being?
One of them being the payment of the pre-delivery payments, which would actually have impacted negatively on the balance sheet of SAA. In addition, Airbus would also refund the 1.3 billion of pre-delivery payments because it was for a full number of 20, now that they were reducing the number. I approved this agreement because this would reduce the pressure on the company's tight liquidity position. I approved this agreement on the 30th of July 2015, and later in September 2015, confirmed my approval again. Instead, after I had granted my approval, Ms. Mieni, the chairperson, proposed an alternative transaction in which SAA would purchase the A330s and enter into a sale and leaseback of the aircraft with a local leasing company.
Just before you go on, Mr. Nene, the arrangement, the renegotiated arrangement that you refer to in paragraph 116.
Yes.
How important or otherwise was it for the financial viability of SAA?
It was critical, as I was saying, that this would have resulted in a refund of 1.3 billion rands of pre-delivery payments, which it had made on the 10, which would reduce the pressure on the company's liquidity position.
In short, it was critical.
It was critical.
You were at paragraph 118.
Well, and I then responded on the 30th of September to the chairperson requesting assurance that any such amendment would leave SAA in a better financial position than would have otherwise been the case had the swap transaction gone ahead, and that steps must be taken to mitigate any risks that could arise from the original swap transaction not proceeding.
If I may go back, please, to paragraph 117, the sale and leaseback arrangement with a local leasing company. Do you know from your own knowledge or from any investigation whether that was an appropriate or lawful or proper arrangement?
In my response, this is one of the things also I was seeking, but more than anything, to just demonstrate that would have a better outcome than the originally agreed position.
The sale and leaseback arrangement, does it have any particular, or would it have any particular benefits compared to the one that had already been agreed? In other words, as far as you understood, were there any sound reasons why there seems to have been a desire to abandon the earlier arrangement and go for this one?
Our view was that it would have a negative impact. It was for that reason that I said perhaps they would be able, SAA would be able to demonstrate to us what the benefit of that would be. And that's why in the response of the 30th, we requested assurance that any such amendment would leave SAA in a better financial position than would otherwise have been.
Do we know, Minister Nene, the identity of that local leasing company? Or do you know?
Yes, we were ultimately favored with that, but I don't have the details with me here, and I'm sure it's something that can be provided.
That information is available?
Yes.
Whose responsibility ultimately was it to conclude these agreements or arrangements?
Well, finally it was the board's decision. The board had to, but we also had to approve as the ministry, having satisfied ourselves that indeed this is the most prudent way of doing it.
Right. You were at paragraph 118 or 119?
119. In our response, I notified the chairperson also that in the event that there was a material amendment to the transaction, SAA would be required to resubmit an application for approval in terms of Section 54, Sub 2 of the PFMA. I required that the rationale for reconsidering the application as well as the comprehensive business case and the financial implications of the alternatives that were now being considered be provided for my consideration. These requirements were reiterated several times in my subsequent correspondence to the SAA chairperson. Now, during October, I became aware that the persistent delays in reaching finality meant that Airbus was now threatening to walk away from the swap transaction, which would have resulted in Airbus reverting to the original A320 purchase agreement, which was still in place, with the consequence that SAA would now have to pay the pre-delivery payments, the PDPs, for which funds had not been secured, as well as having to recognize impairments that would negatively impact the financial performance of the airline.
It may be an obvious question, Minister Nene, but the financial implications for SAA, what would those have been had this occurred?
They would have been negative in a way.
Yes.
It also came to my attention that in the absence of SAA concluding the original swap transaction, Airbus was enforcing their rights under the A320 purchase agreement and demanding payment of the PDPs. I had been informed that the most immediate payments, which were due at the end of November, amounted to about $44 million. Payment of this amount would have resulted in a cash shortfall and the significant risk of a default by SAA. Therefore, immediate and decisive action was required to conclude the transaction. Following repeated entreaties...
entreaties from whom?
From National Treasury now, the airline submitted a business case because we continued engaging with them, looking at the agency of the matter.
And who submitted this business case? Who in particular?
It was submitted by the chairperson.
Right.
After reviewing the business case, which revealed a number of gaps and flaws, I wrote to the chairperson on the 12th of November 2015, indicating that the business case provided little in the way of concrete information that would be required to make an informed decision, and requested additional details. Now, based on Treasury's review of the alternative proposal during November 2015, it was evident that SAA had not demonstrated that there was certainty that the proposed amendment to the transaction structure would leave the airline in a better financial position than under the original swap transaction structure. There was even a significant risk that it would leave SAA in a materially worse off financial position, where it would be unable to meet its commitments as they fall due. This meant that there was a high probability of SAA defaulting on its government-guaranteed debt, which would have had severe consequences for the fiscus and the economy, as I mentioned earlier. Now, on the 2nd of December 2015, I decided not to approve the alternative transaction. I announced this decision publicly on the 3rd of December in 2015 in a press statement, and there is that press statement. I'm not sure whether you would want me to go through it. And I must also explain why also it was in public. It was because some of these exchanges were also in the public domain. And I actually wanted to make sure that whatever responses, because we were seen not to be cooperating when SAA continues to talk to the media on some of these issues. The statement read as follows, and I quote, SAA had not demonstrated that there was certainty, this is part of the statement, that the proposed amendment to the transaction structure would leave the airline in a better financial position than it would otherwise have been had the airline implemented the original swap transaction structure. In fact, the information indicated that the proposed transaction structure would actually leave SAA in a materially worse off financial position, where it is unable to meet its commitments as they fall due. Although possible benefits may be realized through allowing the airline to continue to pursue an alternative transaction, these were far outweighed by the high probability of a default on the government guarantees and the severe consequences thereof, close quote. Now, I and the Treasury were concerned that should SAA not meet the terms of the pre-delivery payments and therefore default on its obligations, it would have severe negative consequences for SAA and for the country as a whole. And as with nuclear build proposal, we were concerned about the impact of the deal on government's capacity to deliver on its social developmental objectives.
Once again, as with the nuclear deal, you raised the concern about expenditure in one area involving sacrifices or prejudice in another area.
Correct.
The appointment of the SAA board is the next topic you deal with at paragraph 126.
Yes. Now, given all of these challenges, I was extremely concerned by the leadership instability at the airline also, and my concern increased from August 2015 when several senior executives were either replaced or resigned, citing a breakdown of trust with the board. A stable executive management team was crucial to implementing the airline's turnaround strategy so that the airline could return to financial sustainability. At the time, I requested the board to brief me on these developments and their impact on the operations of the airline. Around November, I was called to a meeting with the former president, Mr. Jacob Zuma, and the then chairperson of SAA, Ms. Dudu Myeni.
That's November 2015.
2015, yes. This meeting took place shortly after I had attended a meeting of the ANC study group meeting on the 3rd of November 2015. A study group is a caucus of the party sitting in a particular committee where they discuss matters in camera. So having attended that study group meeting on the 3rd, with those that were present in the study group meeting, as I can recall, included the chairperson of the committee, Mr. Yunus Karim, Ms. Makosi Khoza, Mr. Des van Rooyen, Mr. Pule Mabe, and Mr. Pinky Kekane, and Ms. Cindy August, who is our parliamentary liaison, and Ms. Tigeledi Mahlangu. I expressed in the study group meeting the view that either Ms. Myeni leaves or I leave. They said this out of frustration because I had been trying to work on this matter, and she had actually been standing in my way.
This comment, did you make it in a manner audible to all at the meeting?
Correct. It turned out that this was reported.
I'm sorry. Or have you finished paragraph 127? I want to ask you a question if you have finished with it.
I'm on the last sentence.
Oh, okay.
on
Just
that.
that's fine.
And I said this was reported to Mr. Nene, as it turned out to be, who was not in the study group on the day.
From what you have just said, I think you said this about either Ms. Miene must leave or you leave. You said this was out of frustration. I'm not sure whether up to this stage you have explained your relationship with or interactions with the chairperson of the board of SAA adequately in terms of what produced that frustration, other than, I think what appears here is certain suggestions were being made from her side or by her. You were responding to them. There was disagreement about some of those, but it may be that it's much more than that. I don't know. Was the frustration based on just disagreement, or was there much more than that?
It was indeed as a result of, you will see, Deputy Chief Justice, the goings on and the lack of appreciation of the urgency of the matter and lack of appreciation of the magnitude of the problem we are confronted with. You said earlier, when you look at the numbers, they were shocking. So we have an airline here which is in dire financial straits, and when you try to remedy that through the proper processes, you do not get the required response. You actually get a sense of somebody who's just not prepared to work with you in order to correct the situation.
Or are you done with that answer? You want to
yes,
continue?
I am. Yes.
At that stage, how was the composition of the board of SAA in terms of expertise, in terms of experience, relevant experience? Were there sufficient people in the board who ought to have had an appreciation of some of the things that Treasury or yourself was putting forward?
Chair, there were issues with the board. It was one of the things that we also sought to deal with. But you will also notice that some of the board members and the staff, there was also this disconnect where some of the executives actually felt that they cannot work with the board, and they were in the process. Some had resigned, and even in the board itself, the board was very thin on the expertise. All of that needed to be addressed as a matter of urgency.
Are you able to say, based on your interactions with the board or with the chairperson of the board, are you able to say that whether largely the positions they were taking were based on lack of relevant experience on certain matters in terms of running a business, in terms of finances, or was it a situation where even if there was expertise and experience, maybe and appreciation, but there was a determination to go in a certain direction? Which of the two, or was it a combination?
I think it's a combination of the two, Chair, because you would find that, for instance, with regards to the swap transaction, when a completely, having approved the A320 swap, all of a sudden, an irrational decision is taken that no, we're going to go now for a lease and for a buyback and lease and lease arrangement, which did not make sense. And for me, it wasn't clear where it comes from. So it is a combination both of perhaps a level of incompetence, but at the same time, perhaps ulterior motives to go in a particular direction.
Thank you.
Can I proceed to
Please
paragraph
proceed.
128? Then at this meeting, which I've alluded to with the President and Ms. Miene, the President said he was trying to get us to find each other. I'm not sure of the English here, but it was because there was a sense that the two of us were, at each other's throats, if I were to say.
Was it not meant to say you find a way of working together.
Something like that. And I think this was written in Zulu and English, both in Zulu and English. Yeah. So perhaps you can call it Zinglish or something. So I found it odd because Ms. Miani, in a way, reported to me. The institution was under administration and she was supposed. Yet I found it strange that the president was treating us like just two errant school children. It was an awkward meeting, and she went on to complain about me, and that's where the issue of that's where I picked up that she knew that I had said in the study group where she was not there, that I had said it's either she goes or I go. She complained about me, and I realized that there was little to be achieved at this meeting, as it seemed intended to allow Ms. Miani to complain. However, what I did was to state the issues as I saw them, that I felt that Ms. Miani was obstructive, and that she played the media, and that's why I ended up responding to the media as I explained earlier. I indicated that I was of the view that perhaps she should be removed from the board because under her leadership, the airline had perpetually been in crisis throughout the year. And reckless actions by the board had repeatedly exacerbated rather than averted the crisis. And on a number of occasions, this had meant that there was a material threat to the airline which would default on its government-guaranteed obligations, which would have had negative consequences for the fiscus and the economy. And after expressing my views, I requested to be released from the meeting.
Before you continue, at this stage, if it's not stating the obvious, what conclusions had you drawn about the former president's understanding of and respect for the role of Treasury, and in particular you as Minister of Finance?
As I indicated, I found it strange that instead of receiving the support in terms of trying to resolve the challenge, we were given the same status with a person whom I actually thought had been errant, and I was supposed to be the one that reports to my principal.
What was your view at this stage of the former president's understanding of the responsibilities of Treasury and the need for Treasury to carry out those responsibilities in the interest of the finances of the country?
It demonstrated either a lack of appreciation or disregard.
Right, and you say then on the 9th of December 2015?
Well, on the 9th of December, I had made a submission for the appointment of the new SAA board, which was circulated to the cabinet, but it was not tabled for discussion.
Do you know why? Can you make any assumptions as to why?
There wasn't a consensus that it should be tabled. We're not ready to deal with it.
Would you then?
It's one of the matters that we were not able to submit for declassification.
Would you then please deal, Minister Nene, with the Khartoum route issue?
I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius. In regard to the matters that he's unable to deal with because there was no disclassification, is there a plan to arrange that in due course, or no? There's no intention to do it? Is it matters that may be relevant that he can't deal with, or maybe you might not do because?
Well, application was made for declassification of board minutes in relation to the South African Airways issue. We received declassification of board minutes for another cabinet meeting and not this particular meeting, so we have to resubmit that application.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. The Khartoum route. On the 17th of June, I received a letter from Ms. Miani informing me that, and I quote from the letter, in a phone call discussion with His Excellency President Zuma, while in Sudan 3 months ago, a request was made for SAA to evaluate the potential for a new route to Khartoum. close quote. The letter requested me to consider the outcome of a business case for SAA to open a new route from Johannesburg to Khartoum via Entebbe in Uganda. The business case was set to provide a basis on which I can present the results to the President. The letter came to me 3 days after the Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir had left South Africa after having attended a summit of African heads of state. It was made in circumstances where the executive management of SAA did not agree with the proposal. A review of the letter and business case showed that SAA would incur losses of approximately 30 million rands in the first 2 years of operation, money that the airline simply did not have. I attach a copy of the letter and business case as NN 6.
Briefly, Minister Nene, would you just summarize the conclusions in the business case? I'm not sure we have to go to the document itself.
I think the loss of 30 million rands clearly spells that out, and it just showed that this was an irrational proposition to...
and in any event, is your response to Ms. Mieni as dealt with in para 131 consistent with those findings?
Correct.
Would you deal with the response to the chairperson, please?
I quote again from the letter. I said, I understand from your letter that the evaluation for a potential new route for SAA to Khartoum arose as a result of a discussion you had with His Excellency President Zuma. And then I went on to say that the business case evaluating the new route projected that the route would incur losses of approximately 30 million rands in the first 2 years of operation. Notwithstanding the projected losses, you have stated some alternative measures which could make the route financially viable. These include the subsidization of SAA services by the government of Sudan, or SAA undertaking operations on behalf of the government of Sudan as a designated flag carrier. The costs and benefits of these alternatives have not been provided, and implementation, if possible, would require engagement of various stakeholders within both the governments of the Republic of Sudan and South Africa before being considered. As part of the National Treasury's ongoing weekly technical meetings with SAA, continuous feedback is being provided with regard to the progress of the implementation of the network and fleet plan. During these meetings, SAA indicated that the letter received from you is purely for information purposes and is not a PFMA Section 54 application. In the event that SAA decides that it would be favorable to operate the route, a comprehensive PFMA Section 54 application would need to be submitted for my consideration. Consequently, based on the current proposal, I'm not in support of SAA commencing operations to Khartoum. In conclusion, due to the loss-making nature of the proposed operations to Khartoum, I do not approve the commencement of operations on the envisaged route. That's how the letter, and I attach the copy of this response and memo for not approving the proposal as NN7.
And what was the outcome of your refusal to approve the proposal, to the best of your knowledge?
Well, I think this and other similar decisions frustrated Ms. Mieni and the President, and I suspect might have contributed to the decision to remove me.
Yes. Perhaps we can then deal with your removal from office in all these circumstances.
Indeed, Chair. And after that cabinet meeting on the 9th of December, after it ended at about 7:30, you can imagine this was indeed a marathon cabinet meeting.
5:30 or 7:30?
5:30, 17:30, sorry. I was on my way home from the meeting when I received a call from the President's office informing me that the President wished to see me. I immediately turned back to the Union Buildings and arrived at the Union Buildings at about 6 o'clock, 1800 or quarter past. When I arrived, I was required to wait in the waiting room for a short while. Ms. Lakela Kaunda was in the waiting room. We greeted, but nothing further passed between us. After a short while, the President emerged and ushered me into his office. The first thing the President said to me was, I had asked them to tell you that I wanted to see you. This is a quote. After the meeting, he had asked Ms. Kaunda, who I found in the waiting room, to contact me, but she had not. Nor did she mention anything about it in the waiting room when the two of us were together. She was clearly aware of what was going on, I assume. I informed him that I did not receive that message. The President then said, and I quote him, it was said in Zulu, I hope the interpretation is okay, and it's not going to be English. He said, you would remember that when we were discussing the establishment of the Africa Regional Center, I had said that we would have to deploy a senior, high-ranking individual in that position. I confirmed that I recalled the President saying that. Now, by the Africa Regional Center, the President meant the African Regional Center of the BRICS New Development Bank, which we call the BRICS Bank. The BRICS countries had signed an agreement establishing the BRICS Bank at the 6th BRICS Summit on the 14th of July in Brazil in 2014. The BRICS Bank, that it has to have regional offices, and the first of which is the Africa Regional Center located in Johannesburg.
So
Now,
I'm sorry, Minister, just going back to paragraph 136.
Yes.
You have said that what is quoted there was said in isiZulu.
Yes.
So effectively, or technically, there should be something that indicates to the reader that what is quoted is not the words of the
in
President,
English.
it's the
Yes.
translation.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
okay.
Well, then again, on this one, 138, we do mention that, speaking in isiZulu, he did say that we discussed this matter with the top 6, and we agreed we should put you there. Close quote in isiZulu and English. I asked when this decision was to take effect, and he informed me that he would be making an announcement shortly. I thanked the President for having provided me with the opportunity to serve the country as Minister of Finance. We shook hands, and I left. The entire meeting lasted for 2 to 3 minutes, which is good after a marathon cabinet meeting.
May I ask at this point, Minister Nene, do you know of any protocol or practice in relation to removal of ministers? Do you have any comment in that regard?
No, as I said earlier, there is no protocol. You are on a 24-hour contract.
Please continue.
The President made no mention of any other reason for my removal. I didn't ask him for reasons for this decision, as I did not think it would be appropriate. That was the first and last time we ever spoke about the position at the BRICS Bank. It is obvious that the deployment to the BRICS Bank was a fabrication, if I were to say so. I say so because the President had no authority to offer me a position or to deploy me to a position in the BRICS Bank. Nor could such an appointment be considered at that stage, at least without due process, which also involves other member countries. My understanding is that there's a formal process for appointments at the BRICS Bank, which we have followed now that we have appointed somebody there. Furthermore, there is a clear line of authority within the BRICS Bank. It is the vice presidents who are responsible for various functions within the bank, and the responsibility for the regional offices fell under, and it would be his responsibility to lead the process of the appointment of the Africa Regional Center of the bank. The President has, in my view, no authority to make any appointments at the bank. As a head of state, his role is limited to participation at summit meetings. In any event, I already held the position of governor at the BRICS, a position more senior than the one to which I was being deployed, so to speak. Needless to say, the offer did not materialize and the position remained vacant until I returned as Minister of Finance and have since appointed the current holder of that position. And I always tell this guy that he took my job. After my meeting with the President, I made contact with several people via SMS and telephone calls regarding what had just happened. Later on, I met the then DG at my official residence, and I encouraged him to continue to keep the Treasury team together and to motivate. Perhaps I must mention the people that I sent messages to. I sent messages to the Deputy Minister, and I sent one to my wife because I did not want her to be shocked by the announcement, and indicated that there might be an announcement about me. It is nothing to worry about. And well, it seemed like the news had already started spreading. Then the DG, the DM, the DG, and those are the three that I sent out. And as I said, when I met the DG, I encouraged him to continue to keep the Treasury team together and to motivate it even in the face of what had happened. I repeated the same in the morning of the following day when I visited the Treasury to clear my office and to say my goodbyes to the rest of the Treasury staff.
It appears that even at that time of your own personal dismissal, your concern was principally at least, or importantly at least, in relation to the integrity of Treasury as an institution. Is that correct?
That is correct. Indeed, I was also later I did return later later on to address the entire staff of 1,000 some odd people to preach the same gospel, that they must, they are important. They are an important institution. It's not about individuals. It's the institution that matters.
The time when you returned to address the staff, was that when you were reappointed as finance minister or in between your dismissal and your reappointment?
No, it was much earlier after my dismissal. I had just stopped by, and Minister Gordon thought that that message was going to be critical, coming from a person who has just been laid off and waiting for his unemployment insurance to pay off.
Okay, thank you.
Before you deal with the conclusion, Minister Nene, there are two matters that I'd like to deal with. The first is at paragraph 49, if you would go back there, of your statement.
I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius, what paragraph?
49.
Okay.
Are you there,
Correct.
Minister?
Yes, I am.
You say in that paragraph that you really first became suspicious of the Gupta family's intentions around 2013 after reports on the funding of the Estina dairy farm. You also say, and would you place on record what you say in the next sentence, please?
I had also been invited to the Gupta niece wedding in Sun City, but had declined the invitation and did not attend the wedding.
Then, may I just ask you, the Independent Development Corporation, does that organization resort under Treasury?
No.
Is it independent from Treasury?
It is. It falls under the Department of Economic Development.
Okay. Are you aware of the fact that there was a loan, and it appears in the public domain to be a loan of some 250 million rand to a Gupta-related entity to purchase a uranium mine?
From the IDC?
Yes.
Yes,
Right. And we all know that uranium and the mining of uranium is necessary for nuclear production.
Well, I did not know then, but after the revelations, I do know.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to place that on record. Finally, your conclusion.
Well, I have prepared this statement in accordance with the request of the legal team of the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. It may not reflect all that I witnessed during my tenure as the Minister of Finance. During my brief tenure, the key events related to the 2015 budget and the 2014 and 2015 medium-term budget policy statements. I also tabled the financial intelligence, I think it needs to be corrected here, Center Amendment Bill and the Financial Sector Regulations Bill after their approval by Cabinet, which was subsequently adopted by Parliament. I reserve the right to supplement this statement at a later stage.
Minister Nene, again, if I may delay you a little longer. It is suggested that I ask you why, if you wish to say, you declined to attend the wedding referred to in paragraph 49.
As I indicated earlier, I just felt it would not be appropriate.
That is the evidence of the witness. I do have one matter to deal with, which is of a procedural nature.
Well, before you go to the one matter relating to procedure, that last paragraph of the minister, in the minister's statement, the matters that are not covered in this statement to which he refers in that paragraph, would those be matters that fall within the terms of reference of this commission, but outside of the term of reference that we are dealing with now, with the result that the plan of the legal team is that he may be invited at some other time to come and deal with them when the commission deals with other terms of reference, or are those matters that do relate to the term of reference that we are talking about, namely dismissals of ministers and their appointments?
To answer the last question first, Chair, we have probably dealt with all the matters relating to term of reference 1.1 to 1.3, subject, however, to issues that we have not yet investigated that arose in the short period between the time we received the statement and the time the Minister has given evidence, and that relates to press releases yesterday. But subject to that, we've dealt with term of reference 1.1 to 1.3. I can't say with certainty whether other matters will be dealt with and what those matters are, but the likelihood is strong that the Minister will be asked to return at some stage.
Okay. Maybe I must just ask the Minister. In relation to that last paragraph, Minister, the way it's formulated, it suggests that there may be matters which you believe you haven't dealt with, which may well be relevant, and that's why you reserve the right to supplement the statement. Is that because there are other matters that you believe are not covered by your statement, which nevertheless fall within the terms of reference of the Commission, but maybe might need to be dealt with later? I'm just trying to understand so that we don't leave something out that may actually be relevant, or if it's something that is relevant but conveniently should be dealt with later, then I just need to know.
I think it is with the understanding that it is not possible to deal exhaustively with everything. Should there be anything outside of what have been provided, even if it falls within this, that I'm available to deal with that.
Yes, I think I probably should say no more than saying that both the legal team and Mr. Trengov is here, that you obviously appreciate what is going on in my mind, and if the Minister has knowledge of other matters that he hasn't dealt with which are relevant to any of the terms of reference, then at some stage that information would be disclosed to his legal team and the Commission's legal team, and then they can. Yes, it is something we should look at.
I'm sorry, Chair. We will, as an indication, be dealing more thoroughly too with the role of Treasury,
Yeah,
the
in due
importance
course.
of its integrity,
Yeah.
and attacks on Treasury, and it may become necessary to
Yeah.
request the Minister for assistance at that stage.
Yes.
Chair, before I deal with the procedural matter, perhaps Mr. Trengove may want to address you.
Well, last time I think he indicates the same. Oh, Mr. Trengove, say what you want to say.
No, Chair, I have nothing to add. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I have one or two questions to ask. Minister, you said that at that meeting of the 9th, I think it was of December 2015, the former president said to you that I guess your departure from cabinet or your going to wherever he said you were going to be going to had been discussed at a meeting of the top 6.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Did you want to just explain what the top 6? I have my own understanding.
Yes, the top 6 is
because I just want for the record
yes,
so that we
that's
know.
the leadership of the ANC, which comprises of the President, Deputy President, Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General, the Chairperson, and the Treasurer General.
He didn't tell you when that meeting had taken place.
No. No, he didn't tell me.
Would you know whether the top 6 keeps minutes of their meetings?
I wouldn't know. I do not aspire to know also.
No, that's fine. The next thing is what transpired between the two of you at that meeting is quite important. When I look at your statement, it seems that he said something along the lines of asking you whether you remembered a certain conversation, previous conversation, and you did remember that conversation. And that conversation contemplated that a certain type of person may need to be taken or given a certain job. Yeah. Am I right so far?
That is correct.
Yes. And then he said, in effect, that is where you were going to go.
Correct.
Yes. But you do say in your statement and in your evidence that actually he did not have any power to effectively appoint you to that position. Am I right?
You are correct. I would imagine the only thing that the leadership could have done was to encourage somebody to apply for the job.
Yes.
Not to deploy to the job.
Yes. Now, did you understand the reason? Okay, maybe you didn't, but did you understand him to be saying to you the reason why you were being removed from the position of Minister of Finance was because you were needed in that position that he talked about? In terms of his reasons as opposed to what your own analysis of the reasons are.
Well, this is a position that the former president articulated in the public domain, not only at that meeting.
Yes.
But these are the reasons that he advanced, that he thinks because of my skills, I'm the suitable candidate for that position.
Well, my recollection might not be perfect, and you may say what your own recollection is. I seem to think that he was reported in the media also maybe to have said that your skills were even more needed there, or you were very qualified for that position. As if it was a promotion, or am I mistaken?
Interestingly, yes.
Yeah. Now, after reading your statement, it occurred to me that I may have read in the media or heard in the media that at some stage he said, maybe in Parliament, to a member of Parliament that that member of Parliament did not know what the reason was for your dismissal as Minister of Finance. So I got my staff to check something, and I see here something here, and I don't know, that there is nothing. It may be that it's attributed to him. It says, quote, "You say a sitting finance minister was removed without reason, but you don't know the reasons why I removed a sitting finance minister." Now, I guess if it's I removed, that must be a president, because I guess only a president can remove a minister. Now, assuming that that is correctly attributed to him, I would imagine that it would create some confusion, because he had publicly stated the reason why you were removed. And therefore, any member of Parliament, anybody publicly would be expected to know what reason he had given.
Absolutely.
But now if he says to a member of Parliament or anyone in the public that you actually don't know the reason why the Minister of Finance was removed, it may suggest that there was a reason other than the one that was publicly stated. Is my understanding, if this is correct, would that be your understanding as well? Is that how you would take it or not?
I wouldn't want to venture into that space, Chair.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to venture into that. I have stated what I think are the other reasons.
Yes.
Other than that one, and I therefore would want to keep it that way.
No, I guess the legal team would just check in due course whether there is a record of that. I understand from what I've seen here, which is in the public domain, that it may have been an answer to a question by the leader of the official opposition in Parliament. So, but I'm sure when the former president gets an opportunity to present his side of the story, he would be able to deal with all of that. Thank you very much.
May I just ask one question arising out of your questions, Chair? At that 2-minute meeting, Minister Nene, did the President or former President indicate who your replacement was to be?
No, he did not.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much, Minister, for coming to give evidence. As you heard, you probably will be asked to come back at some stage, and I'm sure that you will come back. Thank you very much for coming, and you are excused. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That remains, Chair, to ask you to condone the fact that in terms of the rules, the legal team has not issued any notices to implicated persons. In terms of Rule 3.3, the principal reason for that being we received the statement through unavoidable circumstances, principally the commitments of the Minister on Monday night last, 1 day ago, 2 days ago. But we can give you the assurance, Chair, that we will attend to the matter as soon as possible.
Are you moving the application for condonation as you stand, or are you indicating that you will you will do so in due course.
Well, unfortunately, we're asking for forgiveness, not permission. So we ask you to, insofar as it's necessary, and we're not sure that it is necessary for there to be a formal application and formal condemnation, because you have a wide discretion in terms of the rules, Chair. We just perhaps are notifying you of that fact.
Well, in terms of process, it may well be that anyone who was entitled to be given those notices should be given a chance to say something about whether there should be condonation.
I don't know what one does about that.
It may well be, but
you can't scratch the evidence from the record.
We are safer if if I make the decision after all concerned have been given an opportunity. If they want to say something about it, they might be wanting to say, really, there was no reason for them not to be given notice and blah, 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 blah.
That's fully understood, Chair. Perhaps what we should do when we issue the notices is say to the affected persons if they have any matter to raise in relation to the issue of the notices, they should do so in their response.
Let me leave it to you how you will deal with it, but I am prepared to allow you to deal with the issue of condonation later on when everybody can be heard.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes. When we adjourn now, we would be resuming, is it on the 10th?
As at present advised, Chair, efforts have been made to call back witnesses to complete their testimony and to deal with cross-examination, and in addition to deal with term of reference 1.8. And we're still reasonably confident that we can call other witnesses for the vacant days between now and the 12th of October, when Minister Gordon will give evidence.
Yes. So do we make any announcement as to when we'll resume, or do we make any announcement now, or are we going to issue a media statement once we are certain about when the next hearing will be?
Sorry, Chair. Perhaps we should simply state that we will reconvene on the 10th of October at 10 a.m., subject to any notification that might be given to the public through the press attaché.
Okay, thank you. We are going to adjourn at this stage. As things stand, the next hearing will be on the 10th of October, but there may be a possibility that we send out a media statement indicating to the public other earlier dates or other dates, or if there is a change in regard to the 10th. But as things stand, the next date of the next hearing will be on the 10th of October.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn.
Thank you.